Welcome back to the Book Authority, a show to help you become more successful and have more fun at your writing, publishing, and marketing your books. Our Book Authority of the week is Dick Margulis. Did I pronounce that correctly?
Margulis.
Margulis,
Close.
I'm sorry,
Yeah.
Margulis. And we're talking about an editor and a designer, a page designer and typographer. So, Dick, thank you for being my Book Authority of the week.
Glad to be here.
Can you tell us a little bit about yourself and perhaps how you got started in the typesetting business?
Oh, I started setting type before I was in the business. I was in junior high school, actually. I had a buddy who was in the printing club, and he gave me a little guided tour of the print shop, and I got fascinated with it and started studying fonts and type and the history of type, and it's been an avocation and a vocation ever since, and I started editing copy on my junior high newspaper, so I've been doing both of them for a long time.
Okay. Talk about learning the history of type. Are there letters? There's like A, B through Z. What do you mean by the history of type?
Well, you know, you've heard of Gutenberg.
I have. I wasn't around when he was there.
I feel like I was sometimes.
Sometimes I do too.
Yeah.
I know what you mean.
People think of Gutenberg as having invented printing. Of course, he didn't invent printing. He didn't invent printing from type, but he did invent type casting. Or he and a friend of his invented type casting, and thus the invention of movable type, and greatly reduced the cost of producing books. Of course, up till then in Europe, they had been produced by scribes in the monasteries, sure, and were very expensive. But the letter forms themselves stem from handwriting, and from handwriting in different parts of the world, different parts of Europe in particular. And so those have evolved into all the thousands of fonts that we have today.
The word font is the Times New Roman. Is that the?
Well, typeface is really a better term. A font, going back to the days of foundry type, the word font is cognate of the word foundry. Were individual cast metal letters. Now, of course, we have computers, and everything is just a digital file somewhere on the computer that defines the outline of a character, but we call them fonts. They're really typefaces.
And as I understand, there are two types of typefaces, a serif and sans serif?
Well, there are tens of thousands of typefaces, and they can be categorized a variety of ways. The text faces that we normally want to see in a book so that we're reading comfortably in our culture tend to be serif faces. Not always. A lot of times you'll find magazines that are set in a sans serif face, particularly in Europe. But we don't do that for the ordinary book. Sometimes you'll see a coffee table book that has very limited blocks of type in it, and they'll be done in an attractive sans serif face.
You said there are tens of thousands of typefaces?
Tens of thousands.
Tens of thousands. How?
Mostly used for advertising, not mostly used in books.
I just can't imagine the letter A being written 10,000 different ways.
Well, it can be.
Obviously so.
But it still has an A-ness to it, so that you can pick it up and read it and say, oh, that's an A.
Yeah. It just, I know I've seen a lot of different typefaces on books that have these listed, but I never thought of tens of thousands of them.
Some of them are pretty obscure, and some of them are fairly hard to read, but again, they're used in advertising and labeling and that sort of thing.
Oh, that's great. Okay. So let's just start, before you get into type, you have to have the book edited.
You have to have the book edited.
Let's talk about that. And what is involved with editing a book?
Well, it depends who my client is. I don't do much work for publishing companies. I mostly work for self-publishing authors. Now, these are not people who are going to a vanity press and just sending off their Word file and wishing for the best. These are people who have taken on the role of publishing the book, and that means doing all of the functions of publishing a book, from preparing the manuscript through marketing and distribution. So here's this individual who's written a book, might be a writer, might not be a writer, might be an author, somebody who has knowledge about a subject but isn't particularly a craftsperson with words. And they're going to be responsible for the editing and the design and the proofreading and the printing. They're going to be responsible for all that, but they're not going to do it all,
right,
because nobody can do all of it. Right? So the first thing that happens is the manuscript that they've written in their garret or in their office or wherever they've written it, presumably using a computer and a word processor so that I don't have to transcribe their chicken scratching off of legal pads. That manuscript needs to be edited.
In what format would you get it? Would we double-spaced?
As long as it comes in a Word file, I don't care about the format because I'm going to change the format to make myself comfortable.
Sure.
All I'm interested in at that point is the stream of words.
So
I don't expect the author to design pages. I just want to know this is the title, this is the subtitle, this is the first line of the chapter, and here we go.
So you don't edit it off the paper, you edit it off, do you print out the file yourself? Or?
I do it all on screen. Different editors have different styles. Some people would rather just curl up in a chair with a mechanical pencil and
the red marker.
I got a lot of those. Editors don't like red because authors don't like red.
I see.
They use blue a lot. A lot of people would rather have it on paper. I'm not one of them. I prefer doing it on the screen. I've been working with computers for 20-some years, 30-some years. So the first thing that happens is I have to read it, and I have to say, well, is this a book or isn't it a book? Is this even something that's ready to go into the publishing process, or do I say to the author, go meet with your crit group, your friends who are writers, and process it that way a little bit more, because this isn't really a book yet. Or I'll go ahead and start editing it.
Do you mean, when you say it's not a book yet, do you mean from a content perspective?
I mean from a content perspective. I mean...
so you do content editing and proofing?
Yes. I don't do proofreading. I do copy editing, and I line editing, and I do development editing, which is developing the concept, the content, the information, or the story, if it's fiction, and developing that to the point where somebody can read it and gain something from it. Very often, people who are, as I said, authors, not writers, especially with nonfiction, don't have any idea how to organize their thoughts, let alone how to transcribe it into English. Writers, on the other hand, novelists and so on and so forth, some of them are better than others. Some of them are visual thinkers. They've watched a lot of television. They haven't read a lot of books. They've got this great idea for an adventure story, but they have no concept of how to turn that into a page that's going to excite somebody when they're reading it. They don't understand dialogue. They don't understand plot structure. They don't understand character development. So I've got to help them with all that. And other people are fine writers, and they just need a little touch-up.
Well, that's a lot more than I would expect from an editor. If you get into that, editors I've dealt with generally are just proofing. They're copy editing, grammar, structure.
I do that, and obviously, depending on what the level of edit that the work needs, I'm going to charge a different amount of money. I'm not going to do a full developmental edit on something that's inchoate for the same price that I would copy edit it.
Certainly. It's just a real advantage that you bring to the author to have that kind of feedback from the editor.
Well, I hope so. I hope that I'm the reader's representative, because the author's been living with this thing maybe for 4 or 5 years, and nobody else has seen it besides the author's spouse and maybe kids, and they're going to be nice to the author. I'm not going to be so nice. I'm going to represent the reader, and I'm going to say, this doesn't make sense to me. We have to fix this. But then it's a partnership. It's working together.
Even you're getting into the dialogue, getting into the plot.